your fresh and unbiased voice in American politics. Hey guys, welcome to another video, Purple Political Talk here, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at Donald Trump's possible ways to come back in this election and how he has been recently surging in the most recent 2020 presidential election polls, and taking a look at what this recent surge means for the electoral map. So before we get started, please remember to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. So let's get started. So we're going to start off by taking a look at these polls that we're recently seeing from a nationwide point of view, in addition to a state-by-state basis where we're seeing the president start surging a little bit. In some cases, it's not a lot. However, in other cases, it is a pretty noticeable growth, and even puts him in the margin of error in many key swing states, which, if you think about it, it's something that's very crucial during this election. Polling data could be a little bit iffy, generally speaking, so I think it's very important to take that into account. And then I think I'm just going to show you guys essentially why these numbers that we have right now are so important. Why are they so crucial in this election? So let's get started by just taking a look at the nationwide polls. Right now, I think it's very fair to say that the president is behind on a national aspect. Looking at past elections, I mean, a 10-point deficit for an incumbent president is almost never fares out well. However, here is something that we're seeing here. We're starting to see the race be very independentized. For example, in crucial swing states, we're seeing the president do very well and holds up with polling data. But at a nationwide point of view, in states like California and New York, those seats are getting bluer. So the margins are going to grow a little bit. And that is something we have to keep in mind. So these nationwide polls are indicators. They're very symbolic of the election. However, they're not going to be the actual results. However, what I wanted to show you guys is, for example, after that last debate where Donald Trump has pretty much done somewhat horrible during the month of October in polling data, we saw here, for example, he went at his worst point over 10%. He started to come back down, and we're seeing a somewhat of a large trend here. If you just take it off the map, we're seeing Donald Trump start coming up to the same polling numbers he had pre his COVID-19 diagnosis, pre the first presidential debate. So that is something we must keep in mind. I mean, at a nationwide point of view, if we think about it, even though these polls might not be the most 100% accurate, at least at projecting who's going to win the election, because again, if we would have listened to national polling data, Hillary Clinton would be sitting as president today. And I think these polls are just very, very symbolic. But what I really wanted to show you guys is take a look at some of the key swing states that really have an impact on the election. Right now, the president needs to win in Florida. He doesn't have Florida. It's going to be game over. He's been to Florida in the last couple of weeks many times because he's very, very pushy to win that seat. And the Democrats are trying to lock up Florida in a way that they realistically just can lock up the presidency for Trump. He cannot win without Florida. So what are we seeing here? We're seeing a very big hike in his polling numbers. He went from being down by 5% almost like during mid-October to during this last couple of days, we're seeing him surge in Florida with gaining 2 percentage points in the polls, making this race super, super tight. So, for example, I think this state is going to be one of those states that are going to be very important, and the Republicans are having a very strong showing during the early voting. Usually, like a rule of thumb for Florida Democrats is that they have to be ahead by a certain margin before election day, like with the early voting, to have a chance of winning Florida. They're not ahead by that much. And comparing to 2016 numbers, the Democrats are underperforming. And we're seeing many crucial counties in Florida. To keep in mind, Miami-Dade County. This is a county that's very, very important. It usually has a very big, amount of votes. And this is like the Democratic stronghold county. We're seeing in this county that the Republicans are just doing very, very well. And those general things that we're seeing a lot of the blue counties getting weaker, the Democrats are getting some support amongst the I-4, but however, it's looking very strong for the president. And when you tell me Biden's leading by these 4 polls, +4, +2, sometimes it's hard to believe because you're seeing these early vote numbers, which are anything but encouraging for the Democrats. You're seeing polls actually tighten up. I mean, we have a poll recently by SurveyMonkey. They're not the most reliable +1, but most polls are coming very, very, very close in the state of Florida. That is something that is very, very interesting. And most recent polls really have been narrowing up a lot. So that is something that we must keep in mind. And for example, in the state of Florida, the polling data during the Democratic primaries were a little off if we think about it. However, I think it's important to analyze the fact that, for example, in the state of Florida, the polls are something that's rather symbolic again. And in general, polls are very symbolic in a way because you're not going to be able to tell who's going to win off these polls, especially if they're these close. And I think at this point in time, a victory for President Trump in Florida is very plausible. That is his first place he needs to win. And to be honest with you, I think from here to November 3rd, it's very possible we get a very tight race in Florida the last couple of days. So that is our first seat that I want to talk about, and I want to talk about some other key seats that we're seeing somewhat of a good trend for former President Trump. Now, take a look at the state of Arizona. Again, this is another state that Donald Trump really hasn't lost as much support here. He had that little peak, or downpour support. However, we're seeing him gain recently, and he's surging in a lot of these key swing states, which, a surge, you would consider it maybe he's leading by 10%. However, in these key swing states, we're seeing him, close up the margins by 50%. So right now, for example, he was behind by 4. He's now behind only by 3 or by 2. So you're closing up those margins, which is going to be easier for the president to win. Arizona, this state is probably going to be very crucial. If the Republicans can do somewhat well and still have a showing in Maricopa County, as well as carry those southern border counties by big margins, the president could definitely win here. And again, this is another state that was looking like Biden was going to win pretty decisively for a former Republican state. However, we're seeing those polling numbers surge for the president. And that is something that we're seeing time and time again in a lot of these swing states. Now, where do I find to be the state right now where the Republicans are doing worse? A place they need to do very, very well in, but currently they're somewhat behind. Let's talk about the Rust Belt. In the Rust Belt, again, we're seeing that little tiny surge for President Donald Trump. He went from being behind by 7 points to now only being behind by 6. And taking a look at how this election has been, where the president's been behind constantly pretty much for the whole election season, it is doing pretty well for him. And this is probably going to be the closest state in the Rust Belt. And if we would have talked about this back in March before the pandemic, I would have told you, you're crazy. Pennsylvania is going to be a pretty blue state comparatively to Wisconsin or something. However, polling numbers in Wisconsin are favoring Biden and by a little bit more. So we're seeing this surge right here. And here's the thing in the Rust Belt. The polls were essentially wrong in 2016. They underestimated President Trump, and truly, he pulled off the silent majority, quote-unquote, vote. What is another thing that we're noticing? If you take a look at these polls, you go on the polling PDF where they show you essentially what the polls, per makeup, per demographic. I think they're oversampling white suburban women, which is a group of voters that have moved from President Donald Trump to Biden, at least at some aspects. So keeping that in mind, Pennsylvania is probably a lot closer. Right now, we're seeing Donald Trump keep on going up. And if a lot of these Hunter Biden stuff, which we saw some of the text messages come out today, at least I thought through Twitter, Candace Owens posted them. And we're seeing a lot of those scandals amongst the Democrats. And at this point, Biden is not on that plane where he's just doing anything. And he could even do the worst thing in the world and he probably could still win the election. At this point. He's not on that plane. Similar to Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton thought she was going to win. She kind of chilled out on campaigning the last couple of weeks in 2016. Look what happened. And at this point, Biden, I think he looked like he was going to be on that plane to having an easy last week of campaigning. However, this last week that we're seeing right now is going to be very, very tough when it comes to campaigning because President Trump is in striking distance. And at this point in time, I would say that it's very, very possible that we see a race that really just starts coming down to the last couple of days. That is something that is very interesting. So I want to take a look now at this polling data that I showed you guys. And just generally speaking, looking how this could transfer onto the electoral map and look at the pathways for a Trump comeback, a Trump victory in this election. So essentially, we must think about this in a couple of ways. So first, we have the polling errors, which is something that we should consider, generally speaking, because that is something that, usually just ends up happening, the polling errors. So that is the first thing. Now, the other thing we have to consider is a lot of this support and enthusiasm for the president, which shows speaks volumes. Here's the thing with these American elections. Polling numbers could say one thing. It could say you're going to win the election by 10 million votes. But if those 10 million people are not excited and pumped for voting for you, they're not going to go out and vote. Both parties have their bases. But I mean, we could say that the Trump base is a lot more enthusiastic in many different ways. And I think that is something very important to analyze. 2016, again, Hillary Clinton lost for many reasons. However, we could say that one of her big problems was voter enthusiasm. I know there's a lot of those Democrats that are very enthusiastic about what they're doing. However, the level of enthusiasm is not the same as Donald Trump's base. And we're seeing a lot of growth in enthusiasm amongst Latinos, amongst Black Americans, now flipping over to the president. That's something, a big thing that we must keep in mind, because that is something that is currently happening in U.S. politics. Now, taking a look at this electoral map, where are the Republicans' best shots at winning? So right now I already have Florida, because this is based off of the electoral map I put during my last prediction. If you haven't watched that, where I thoroughly explained why I think each state is going to, I'll put it at the end in the card. However, this is my prediction as of right now. So essentially, already have Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, those states going for the Republicans, as long as with their other safe-ish swing states like Ohio, Iowa, and Texas. Now, looking at the rest of the states, where are the Republicans' real shots at going through and winning? So, easiest thing right now, probably be winning Arizona. They're within striking distance. If they do that, they're very, very close. They just need 10 electoral votes more, at least to make it a tie, or 11 to win outright. So Arizona's probably going to be one of the states we're going to need. However, if they could just do it with Pennsylvania and they win 279, which at this point in time, having an electoral margin of around 15 to 20 electoral votes is going to be kind of what guarantees you a win. Because remember, there is faithless electors out there, and I have a feeling that there's going to be a lot of faithless electors, similar to the number that there were in 2016. So this wouldn't cut it. The 279, you could lose the election still. So I think to be safe, they would need to win another state, for example, Wisconsin. Or at this point, they're doing pretty well in Michigan, which is another state that have a lot of enthusiasm. So right now, I would say if we're looking at the best case scenario for President Trump, we might be looking at something like this, around 305. He takes maybe Nebraska. You have the same map from 2016. Going back a level, I think right now, out of these states that are red, the least likely right now is probably going to be the state of Wisconsin. He does have his support there. However, it's not that big. Now, dialing it back another step, then probably goes Michigan. It's still possible. However, it's not going to be that big. And then also to take Nebraska with you. Now, I think that's where we're looking at. And now, after that, I mean, if he loses Arizona, it's game over. The Democrats narrowly win. So Donald Trump still does have his pathways, and those pathways are opening up a little bit as we get to the last days of the election. However, those pathways aren't as big. They aren't as possible as, for example, as they were a couple months ago, before the pandemic. And generally speaking, President still does have a chance of winning. And he's going to have to win in these areas, overperform the polls, which is something he's capable of doing. And he's probably going to have to, obviously, prove those polls wrong. And with his recent surge we're seeing in the polls by a couple percent just a couple of days before election, this can mean a very big amount of momentum for the president during this election, which is something that is extremely, extremely crucial, especially going into the last couple of days. So, I mean, overall, I think this map shows you guys essentially what a Trump victory might look like on election night. So, again, Pennsylvania, Arizona, keep in mind those two states, most likely to flip from Trump or to stay with Trump in this case, in case he does win. And then everything else would just be adding on to that. Chances are still there if you're a Trump supporter. If you're a Biden supporter, don't think it's going to be the easiest walk in the park, because it definitely is not. And generally speaking, unless something crazy happens over the last couple of weeks, we're going to see somewhat of a tight election, or a tighter election than a lot of people think. So guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please give it a huge thumbs up, like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. Hope you enjoyed the video, and goodbye.